listeners like you. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy. Our first question comes from Drakion. I know some elements are named after people, but which ones exactly? You know, I had this same thought the other day. When I was in, high school and studying the periodic table for the first time, I noticed a few elements way at the bottom that had suspiciously famous names. Einsteinium, Nobelium, and Mendelevium jumped out at me right away. So, obviously, many of those elements were named for other scientists I had never heard of, right? Well, kind of. There are, as of this recording, 19 chemical elements named for or after people. A few of these are a little bit coincidental, as they are named for objects or locations that themselves were named for people, so they got grandfathered into the element as well. We'll start with those. The first ever element to be named for a person was one of these. Samarium gets its name from the mineral samarskite, from which we derived the element. Samarskite is named for Vasily Samarsky Bayevets, chief of the Russian Mining Engineering Corps in the mid-1800s, who granted scientists access to the site that eventually led to the discovery of the mineral. The discovering scientists named it for him in honor of the role he played in this discovery. The second of these elements is gadolinium, named for the mineral gadolinite, from which we derived the element. Gadolinite was named for Finnish scientist Johann Gadolin, who was the first to discover the element yttrium within a sample of what would later be called gadolinite. The next of these elements was named not for its location in the real world, but for its location on the periodic table. Placed below europium, the element americium was thusly named for the Americas. North and South America are named for Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci, and now so too is americium. Berkelium, discovered at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory based in Berkeley, California, is named for the lab and city in which it was discovered. Berkeley is named for the Anglo-Irish philosopher George Berkeley, who founded the theory referred to as subjective idealism. Jumping way ahead in time, we come to flerovium, first discovered in the Flerov Laboratory of Nuclear Reactions at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Russia. The element was once again named for the lab that discovered it. This lab was, in turn, named for Russian physicist Georgy Flerov, who discovered spontaneous fission. Lastly, in the coincidental camp comes livermorium, named for the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory located in Livermore, California. Livermore is named for the English-born Mexican citizen, Californian ranchero, Robert Thomas Livermore. Livermore was a prominent landowner in the area, and while he did not own this land, nor ever even visit it, it was named in his honor. Okay, now on to the elements that were purposefully named for someone else. The first of which was curium, named for Marie and Pierre Curie, the scientists that pioneered research on radiation. Einsteinium comes next, named for famed theoretical physicist Albert Einstein, known the world over for his theory of everything and the formula E equals mc squared. Fermium follows shortly after, named for Italian physicist Enrico Fermi, member of the Manhattan Project, and often called the architect of the nuclear age. Perhaps somewhat obviously, Russian chemist Dmitry Mendeleev gets the next honor with Mendelevium. Mendeleev is best known for formulating periodic law, making him to many the of the periodic table. Next up is Nobelium, named for Alfred Nobel, known widely for his invention of dynamite and the establishment of the Nobel Prize. Founder and other namesake of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, Ernest Lawrence, gets the next honor with Lawrencium. Another member of the Manhattan Project, Lawrence is known for his invention of the cyclotron. Rutherfordium, named for New Zealand physicist and chemist Ernest Rutherford, comes next. Rutherford is known for many things, including the discovery of the element radon and the concept of radioactive half-life. Another somewhat obvious namesake, if you know him, is Glenn Seaborg, American chemist, and his element, seaborgium. Many of the elements we have discussed here today are called transuranium elements, and Seaborg helped to synthesize and discover 10 of them. Bohrium comes next, named for Danish physicist Niels Bohr, probably most famous for the Bohr model of the atomic structure. Meitnerium comes next, named for Austrian and Swedish physicist Elise Meitner, who helped to discover nuclear fission. Almost done. Third to last is Röntgenium, named for German physicist Wilhelm Röntgen, known for first detecting X-rays. Next to last is Copernicium, named for Polish polymath Nicolaus Copernicus, best known for popularizing heliocentricity, placing the sun at the center of the solar system rather than the Earth. Lastly comes Oganesson, named for Armenian and Russian physicist Yuri Oganessian. Oganessian took over for another elemental namesake, Georgy Flerov, as the head of the Flerov Laboratory, and has worked on the discovery of several elements. Thank you for that great question. I can't wait to hear your reaction. This next question comes from Dr. Jane. I've heard of Asgard and Midgard and Valhalla, but what are the other Norse realms? That is a very good question. The usage of Thor and other Norse gods in modern media, especially in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, has introduced these terms, and some others, into the modern vernacular. However, it seems that the truth of the matter is harder to discern. In Marvel's Thor, we hear the most popular description of the realms of Norse mythology, that Yggdrasil, the world tree, makes up the universe as we know it, and each of the 9 realms lay upon the tree in different locations. In most depictions of the 9 realms, some variation of this is used. Sometimes there are realms in the branches and roots and along the trunk of the world tree. Sometimes they simply lie near or around the tree. Sometimes they are all in the branches. Unfortunately for all of us, this is an interpretation rather than a statement of fact. See, most of what we know about the Norse cosmology comes from only 1 or 2 texts, primarily, which are themselves the formalized writing of what used to be an oral tradition. In those texts, the phrase 9 realms, or 9 worlds, or whichever translation is best, is only mentioned 3 times. It is quite possible that the original cosmology had more than 9 realms. Even further, the suffix heim, used in the names of several Norse realms, translates to home, implying that these terms are not being used to refer to entirely different places, just the parts of the world that those people or creatures are from. This is, I guess, most evident with Svartalfheim and Nidavellir. Svartalfheim translates to a home of the Dark Elves, and is, obviously, where the Dark Elves are from in Norse mythology. Svartalfur, the Norse word for Dark Elf, is also sometimes used as a synonym for dwarf, which makes Nidavellir, home of the dwarves, possibly part of Svartalfheim. Some depictions of the realms these as separate places, while others combine them into one place. Similarly, the location Gladsheim is one of 12 locations named in the poem Grimnismal, of which only one, Alfheim, is ever used as the name of one of the quote-unquote 9 realms. I honestly don't know what makes one Heim more of a realm than any of the others. So, to finally actually answer your question, Valhalla is not often listed as one of the realms of Norse cosmology. It is actually a hall inside Asgard. The realms most often listed as being in the 9 realms are as follows: Asgard, Alfheim, Vanaheim, Muspelheim, Niflheim, Midgard, Jotunheim, Hela or Helheim, Nidavellir, and Svartalfheim. Sometimes Niflheim and Helheim are one and the same. Sometimes Nidavellir and Svartalfheim are one and the same. Depends who you ask. Finally, Yggdrasil is also a location in Norse mythology, but we can get into the lore of the world tree in another video. Thank you for that marvelous question. This last question comes from Buzzard Darkday, who all has gone to the moon. That is a very good question. The answer might depend on what you mean by the moon. Okay, obviously the moon is Earth's moon, but what I mean is that there are 2 separate lists of astronauts that have traveled to the moon. One is a list of those that have walked on the moon, and the other is a list of those that have flown to the moon without ever landing on it. No matter how you feel about it, dear listener, I'll include both lists, just in case. First, those that have walked on the moon. They are listed in order of their Apollo mission number, not in the order they stepped on the moon's surface. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on Apollo 11. Pete Conrad and Alan Bean on Apollo 12. Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell on Apollo 14. David Scott and James Irwin on Apollo 15. John Young and Charles Duke on Apollo 16. And finally, Harrison Schmitt and Eugene Cernan on Apollo 17. Then, those that flew to the moon but never landed. Again, they are listed in their Apollo mission number. Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders on Apollo 8. Tom Stafford on Apollo 10. Michael Collins on Apollo 11. Dick Gordon on Apollo 12. Jack Swigert, Fred Hayes, and Jim Lovell again on Apollo 13. Stu Rusa on Apollo 14. Al Worden on Apollo 15. Ken Mattingly on Apollo 16. And finally, Ron Evans on Apollo 17. All of these missions flew between 1968 and 1972. Who knows when the next person will walk on the moon? I sure do look forward to that day. Thanks for that lovely question. Thank you again to Drakeon, Dr. Jane, and Buzzard Darkday. If you would like to have your question answered in a video, leave it in a comment below this one. If you would prefer to ask your question a little more privately, you can email me your question at questionsandasmr@gmail.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more questions like